Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are diving into a fundamental chapter of biology that explains how every single cell in your body stays alive. So today's topic is movement in and out of cells. Dear students, we have discussed thoroughly about a cell and its structures, its functions. So think of a cell like a tiny, that is a busy factory. And for a cell to work properly and efficiently, it needs to bring in raw materials like oxygen and nutrients. And it must get rid of waste products like carbon dioxide. But the question is here, how do these substances actually cross the cell membrane? So in this video of today lecture, we are going to break down the four big players which you need to know for your exams. The first one is diffusion, that is the natural spread of particles. The second one is osmosis, which is the special way water moves. The third one is active transport. It explains how cells move things against the current or against the gradient. And the fourth one is water potential, which is a key concept that will help us predict where water will go. So by the end of this session, you will be able to explain exactly how cells breathe and eat at a microscopic level. We shall break down this chapter into 2 or 3 sessions, okay, to make you understand quite efficiently about all these four concepts. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, to understand how things move, we first need to understand why they move. A cell is never truly still. It is constantly active, almost like a tiny engine that never switches off. Because of this constant activity, every cell has a list of requirements, things it must take in and things it must kick out. So first of all, let's talk about energy and growth. Just like you need fuel for a car, cells need organic molecules, and the most famous one being glucose. So they use this glucose for respiration to release energy. They also use these molecules as building blocks to grow and repair their parts like their organelles. And the second one, next we have chemical stability. So for a cell to work properly and quite efficiently, it needs water and mineral salts. What is known as the universal solvent because it is the liquid where almost all chemical reactions in the body happen. And finally, we have waste management. This is very critical. When cells work, they produce trash like carbon dioxide. And if this gas stays inside the cell, it makes the environment acidic. And this environment can actually denature your enzymes. Uh, what is denaturing? You can understand denaturing as melting a plastic key. Once the shape is ruined, okay, that is damaged, the key would not fit the lock anymore, and the cell's reaction will stop. That is why movement in and out is a matter of life and death. Now that we have understood what the cell needs, what are the requirements, let's look at the gatekeeper, which is the cell membrane. It uses two main methods to control traffic, and the biggest difference between them is energy. Imagine you spray perfume in one corner of a room. Eventually, it will spread everywhere. That is a real example of diffusion. So it is the movement of particles from an area where there are lots of them, means where there is high concentration, to where there is low concentration. It means that passive transport or diffusion, that is the movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration. But what is the best part here in diffusion process? It costs the cell zero energy. No ATP is required, no energy is required for this process. Okay, it happens all on its own because molecules naturally have kinetic energy. They are always vibrating and moving. This is how oxygen slips into your cells and carbon dioxide is going out, that is slipping out. But what if the cell needs to pull more something in, even if it is already crowded inside? Okay, I want to explain here that diffusion is the process where particles move from high concentration to low concentration. But if the cell needs to move molecules or particles from low concentration to high concentration, how will that happen? Then that is the active transport. Okay, that is the requirement. This is the movement against the concentration, means active transport is the movement of molecules against the concentration gradient, moving things from a low concentration to a high concentration. Think of it like pushing a ball up a hill, okay, because it is a hard work and it requires cellular energy in the form of ATP. So the membrane uses special carrier proteins for this process. Think of these as tiny biological pumps which grab molecules and force them across. We have studied that a little bit in our chapter 2, okay, about carrier proteins and transport proteins, okay, channel proteins. Okay, you can recall that chapter. So we see active transport in plant roots pulling in minerals from the soil, or your own nerve cells, okay, pumping out sodium ions. We shall discuss that thoroughly in next slide in these chapters. This is just a brief introduction of this process. So remember, diffusion is a free ride downhill, while active transport is a paid trip uphill. Okay. Students, to make things really simple for your understanding, let's look at this comparison table. This is exactly how you should think about these two processes when you are answering exam questions. First of all, let's look at energy. Okay, this is the energy. For diffusion, the answer is no. Okay, means no energy is required. This is a passive process. But for active transport, yes, energy is required. The cell must spend ATP, which is our biological energy currency. And next, consider the direction. Okay, it means the direction of movement. Diffusion always moves down the gradient, means from high concentration to low concentration. But active transport is its opposite. It moves up the gradient from low concentration to high concentration. And the next one is, what is the goal of both processes? Diffusion wants to reach equilibrium. It wants to make a balance. This is a fancy word that just means the particles are spread out evenly everywhere. But the active transport, however, that is used when a cell needs to accumulate or pull in a lot of something, or completely expel or kick out a toxic substance. Okay. And finally, the best way to remember this is the ball analogy. Okay, diffusion is like rolling a ball down a hill. Okay, that is an automatic process. Okay, that is an automatic process. It is easy and it happens naturally. But active transport is like pushing that ball back up the hill. It takes effort, it requires energy and a bit of work. So keep this table in your mind. Okay, memorize it and understand it. It will surely help you to easily differentiate between diffusion, that is a passive transport, and an active transport. So keep this table in your mind and you will never get this too confused. Now let's get a bit more technical. If an examiner asks you to define diffusion, you need to use these exact words. It is the net movement. Remember this word, net movement. Okay, it is the net movement of molecules or ions from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Now why did I say net movement? Well, because molecules are always moving randomly in every direction, but overall, or net, more of them, overall or more of them will move toward the empty space than toward the crowded space until everything is balanced. This is the picture. By understanding this picture, you can easily understand what is diffusion and what is meant by net movement. Okay, in this part you can see there is high concentration, and in this part there is low concentration, and then when the molecules move, okay, that creates an equilibrium. Okay, this is the process of diffusion. So describe this journey as down a concentration gradient. Think of that gradient like a physical slope. You do not need a motor to go down a slide. You just let gravity do this work. So in biology, the gravity here is just the natural physics of particles. So what is the actual cause? What is the actual cause of this process? It is simply random movement. Okay, whether we are talking about a gas like the smell of food cooking, like a fragrance of a perfume, or any liquid like a drop of ink in water. Okay, those molecules are constantly bumping into each other. These billions of tiny collisions naturally push the particles apart. That will keep spreading until they are evenly distributed. Okay, so at that point they are still moving. When they reach the equilibrium, at that point they are still moving, but there is no more net change. They have reached their destination. They have created the required balance, the equilibrium. Now, as we have seen how diffusion works in a room or a glass of water, but how does it work across a cell membrane? So, my dear students, for a substance to move into or out of a cell by diffusion, two specific conditions must be met. Okay, first of all, we need a concentration difference. We need a concentration difference. This is the slope where this is slope as we have talked about earlier. Okay, there must be more of a substance on one side of the membrane than the other. If the concentration is exactly the same on both sides, there is no gradient. Means there is an equilibrium. Okay, there is a balance, and the net movement then stops. Secondly, we need permeability. Think of the cell membrane like a fence. Okay, if you remember in chapter 2 lecture, we have discussed that cell membrane is a partially permeable membrane. It controls the movement in and out of various particles, okay, of various molecules. So this fence might that is a cell membrane, it might let a small cat through but keep a large dog out. Okay, this is just an example. So in the same way, the membrane only allows certain things to pass. It is selectively permeable. Okay, fortunately for the cell, small and simple molecules have a backstage pass. Okay, molecules like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and even water are small enough to slip through the gaps in the membrane quite easily. Okay, and if you just think about that, oxygen is very necessary for us. Okay, and this is very necessary for us to kick out carbon dioxide, and water, that is also an essential part of our life. Even water is life. Okay, so these molecules are naturally small enough to slip through these gaps in the membrane quite easily. This is why when we breathe in oxygen, naturally diffuses from the high concentration in your lungs into the lower concentration in your blood cells. Okay, so no energy or pumps is required. It just flows through the fence, through the cell membrane. Okay, now to wrap up our look at diffusion, let's see it in action inside your own body. So diffusion is essentially the way your cells breathe at a microscopic level. First of all, let's look at taking in oxygen. Every second, your cells are performing aerobic respiration. Okay, and this process uses up oxygen to create energy. Because the cell is constantly eating, the oxygen inside, uh, it means that is constantly eating and consuming the oxygen. The concentration of oxygen becomes low. Meanwhile, your blood is bringing fresh oxygen from your lungs, creating a high concentration outside the cell. Okay, and because of that gradient, oxygen molecules naturally diffuses inward. They do not need a pump. They just flow to where they are required. But respiration has a byproduct also, that is carbon dioxide. Okay, so as the cell works, carbon dioxide builds up. Okay, creating a high concentration inside your body. Okay, so now the gradient is reversed. The carbon dioxide molecules diffuses outward into the surrounding tissue or blood, where the concentration is lower. So this constant swap, oxygen in, carbon dioxide out, that is happening in trillions of cells in your body right now. It is a perfect, elegant system driven entirely by the simple laws of physics. No energy spent, just pure efficiency. Okay. So here is a note for your understanding. A tip for you that diffusion is an automatic process. As long as a cell is alive and using up nutrients or creating waste, diffusion will constantly work to move those molecules in the right direction. We understand that diffusion is how cells breathe, but not every animal does it the same way. Okay, it all comes down to size and something called the surface area to volume ratio. Okay, surface area to volume ratios. For example, in small organisms like a tiny flatworm, almost every cell is close to the outside world. They have a very high surface area compared to their small volume. So because of this, they can simply let gases diffuse directly through their skin. No lungs are required there. But for large animals like us, it's a different story. We have millions of cells buried deep inside our bodies where oxygen could never reach by simple diffusion alone. To solve this, nature gave us specialized organs like lungs or gills, okay, to provide a massive surface area. We then use a circulatory system, or which is our blood, to carry those gases to every deep tissue. Now here is a really interesting nitrogen exception. Okay, nitrogen exception. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. You can comment in the comment section that what is the percentage of nitrogen in our atmosphere. Usually, this gas is inert, meaning it does not react with our bodies. It diffuses into our blood and back out without doing much. However, for deep sea divers, the high pressure underwater forces much more nitrogen to dissolve into their tissues. Okay, so if a diver swims to the surface too quickly, that nitrogen does not have time to diffuse out slowly. Instead, it forms bubbles in the blood, kind of like opening a shaken bottle of soda. This causes a painful and dangerous condition, which we call as decompression sickness. Okay, which we call as decompression sickness. So it is a perfect example of how understanding the physics of diffusion can literally be a life saver. Now, as we have seen how animals breathe, but what about plants? Plants are masters of diffusion, using it for two opposite but essential processes, that is photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis is making food, and respiration, that is releasing energy. So to make this happen, the plant uses specialized doorways, which we call as stomata. In this picture, you can easily identify that where is the stomata. So these stomata are tiny pores, mostly on the underside of the leaf. They allow carbon dioxide to enter for photosynthesis and let oxygen as a byproduct to exit. So once the carbon dioxide enters through these stomata, it does not just stop there. It has to reach the food factories of the plant, which is the mesophyll and palisade cells. Okay, the leaf is cleverly designed with large internal air spaces that allow the gas to diffuse quickly and easily to every single cell. However, there is a trade-off. Okay, there is a bargaining. There is a trade-off. Whenever the stomata open to let carbon dioxide in, water vapor naturally diffuses out of the leaf, and this process is called transpiration. Think of it like leaving a window open to this is just an example for your understanding. Okay, that leave a window open to let in a breeze. You might also let out the warmth of the house. This is a trade-off. So the rate at which this water is lost is not constant. It changes based on the environment. If it is a hot, dry, or windy day, the diffusion of water vapor speeds up significantly. So for a plant, gas exchange is a constant balancing act between getting the gases it needs and keeping the water it has. So far, we have talked a lot about gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, but diffusion is not just for air. It is also how our bodies move solutes, which are substances dissolved in a liquid. While plants often have to work to get minerals using active transport, our human systems rely on the free movement of diffusion in three major ways. First of all, let's look at digestive system, specifically the ileum, which is a part of your small intestine. Okay, ileum, that is a part of your small intestine. When you eat healthy food, water soluble vitamins like vitamin B and vitamin C, they reach a high concentration in your gut. They simply diffuse through the lining of the ileum and into your bloodstream to be carried to your cells. Okay. The next one is excretory system, which are your kidneys. So inside the kidneys is a structure called renal capsule. Okay, called renal capsule. Here your body performs a clever trick. Essential salts and urea move back into the blood via diffusion to maintain the perfect chemical balance. And finally, we have a life-saving medical application, that is dialysis. When someone's kidneys are not working properly, doctors use a dialysis machine, okay, and this machine acts like an artificial kidney. It uses a special fluid to create a concentration gradient, literally pulling waste products like urea and excess salts out of the patient's blood using, you guess it, simple diffusion, okay, simple, but through a simple diffusion process. And it is amazing to think that the same process that moves a smell across a room is the same process that keeps patients alive in hospitals every day through dialysis. Now, next topic is about the factors which affect the reaction rate of diffusion. Okay, it includes surface area, concentration, and a few physical factors. Okay, so let's get in to this to discuss these factors. So, my dear students, if diffusion is the movement of molecules, then the cell membrane is the doorway they must walk through. Okay, so common sense tells us that if you have a bigger doorway or more doorways, more people can enter at the same time. This is what we call the surface area effect. The more membrane space available, the more nucleus can cross at once. But cells have a problem. They cannot just grow bigger and bigger, because then the middle of the cell would be too far away from the doors to get oxygen. So how does a cell get more surface area without getting too big? They use projections. Okay, they use projections. For example, look at the cells in your intestine or in your kidney. They are specialized for absorption. Instead of being smooth, they have microvilli. Okay, they have microvilli. This one is. These are tiny finger-like folds that stick out. It is like ruffling a piece of cloth. You have much more material in the same amount of space. In previous chapter, that is chapter number 2, we have discussed about folding and increasing the surface area. Okay, this is not only a recap of that lecture, but that is for your more understanding. Okay, so this folding, it vastly increases the surface area, allowing for rapid diffusion. And you should also know that cell shape also matters, okay, in a diffusion process. A thin flattened cell like the ones in your lungs allows for much faster total diffusion than a perfect sphere. Think of it in this way, that if you want to dry a wet towel, do you leave it bundled in a ball, or do you spread it out flat? Definitely you spread it out. So if you when you spread it, the surface area increases. Okay, so by increasing the surface area, you allow the water molecules to diffuse into the air much faster, and cells do exactly the same thing. Here, you should not be confused between projections, folding, and flattened cell. Okay, projection, by through the process of projection, they increase the surface area. For example, if the we take example of microvilli. Okay, microvilli, they are projections, okay, finger like projections, and then they when they project like a finger, definitely they increase the surface area. You should not be confused with the of this with piling up. Okay, this is the increase in surface area. And the same way, if a cell is flattened, okay, they have no projections, okay, then it will be better for us to spread it out. That will also increase the surface area. Okay, so in this way, projections and cell shape, they both increase the surface area, and then the diffusion also increases. As we have talked about the hill or the slope in previous slides, that molecules roll down. So in biology, we call this the concentration gradient. So the rule is very simple here. The steeper the hill, the faster the ball rolls. If there is a massive difference in concentration between the outside and the inside of a cell, diffusion happens very quickly. So if the concentrations are almost the same, diffusion slows down to a crawl. But here is a very clever part. How do our bodies keep that hill steep so that diffusion never stops? We use a trick called maintaining the gradient. Okay, we call that maintaining the gradient. Think about your red blood cells. As soon as an oxygen molecule diffuses into the cell, it does not just sit there. It immediately sticks to a protein called hemoglobin. And because that oxygen is now locked up with the hemoglobin, it is no longer floating around as free oxygen. So to the rest of the world, it looks like the inside of the cell is simple empty. This keeps the internal concentration of free oxygen very low, making sure more oxygen from your lungs keep rushing in. So it is like a store that hides its stock in the back room, so the shelves always look empty. It encourages more deliveries to keep coming in. So your cells are master strategists at keeping the traffic moving. Now, to finish our deep dive into what makes diffusion fast or slow, we need to look at three physical factors: temperature, distance, and size. First of all, let's talk about temperature. Think of molecules like dancers on a floor. If you turn up the heat, literally, you are giving them more kinetic energy. They start moving faster and colliding with each other much more often. Because they are bouncing around so energetically, they spread out much quicker. This is why a tea bag develops much faster in boiling water than in a cold cup. The next one is distance. This one is very simple. The further you have to walk, the longer it takes to arrive. Okay, the simple rule. The further you have to walk, the longer it takes to arrive. Cell membranes are incredibly thin, only about 0.007 micrometers thick. However, sometimes a molecule has to cross multiple layers. For example, when oxygen moves from the alveoli in your lungs into a red blood cell, it has to pass through several walls, and every extra layer adds distance, and every micrometer of distance slows the rate down. This is why your lung tissues are kept as thin as possible. Finally, we have molecular size. In the word of diffusion, being small is an advantage. Generally, smaller molecules like oxygen can zip through gaps much faster than large bulky molecules. But here is a fun fact for your exams. Some tiny ions actually attract water molecules to themselves. Okay, this makes them effectively larger and heavier than they look on paper, which can actually slow them down. So remember, hotter is faster. Okay, hotter is faster means high temperature. Hotter means high temperature, and then the diffusion is faster. Shorter is faster means if distance is shorter, diffusion is high, and smaller is faster means if the molecular size of a particle is smaller, then the diffusion will be faster. So hotter is faster, shorter is faster, and smaller is faster. So far, we have treated the cell membrane like a simple sieve or a net, but in reality, the cell is much smarter than that. It does not just let things drift in. It actively manages, it actively controls the speed of movement through controlled diffusion. First, let's look at special pores. Okay, some molecules like water or amino acids are so important that the cell cannot wait for them to slowly drift through the membrane. Okay, instead the membrane has specific protein channels. Think of these like express lanes. Okay, these protein channels are like express lanes on a highway, and these channels can even open or close depending on what the cell needs at that exact moment. So when they open, the rate of diffusion shoots up instantly. Second, we have enzymatic help. In some cases, there are enzymes living right inside the membrane. Their whole job is to grab specific substances and help push them through even faster. It's like having a helpful neighbor who sees you carrying heavy groceries and holds the door open for you. And finally, we have internal transport. Once a molecule actually gets inside the cell, it does not just float around aimlessly, relying on simple diffusion. That would be too slow for a busy cell. Instead, the cell uses a complex network of internal structures, almost like a tiny subway system, to move materials directly to the organelles where they are required. So, while diffusion starts the process, the cell's own machinery takes over to make sure everything gets to the right place at the right time. To wrap up our deep dive into diffusion, let's look very quickly at this master summary. This table is your best friend for your exam revision because it explains exactly how and why the rate of movement changes. First of all, let's look at the surface area. Okay, when we increase the surface area, diffusion becomes faster. Increase the surface area, okay, diffusion becomes faster. Why? Because we are essentially adding more doors. We are essentially adding more doors for the molecules to pass through at the same time. Next one is temperature. If the temperature goes up, the rate is faster. This is because the molecules gain more kinetic energy. They are vibrating and zipping. Okay, they are vibrating and zipping around much more aggressively. Third one is concentration gradient. A high gradient means a faster rate. Think of it as a steeper slope. The bigger the difference between the inside and the outside, the harder the molecules, the harder the molecules are pushed to even things out. Okay, so now look at distance. This is the only one where increase makes things slower. Okay, increase make things so not the only one, even molecular size is also in this category. Okay, so this is where an increase makes things slower. If you increase the distance, molecules have much further to travel to reach their destination, so it takes more time. And finally is molecular size. Larger molecules make the process slower. Just like in real life, smaller, lighter particles can zip through gaps quickly, while larger, bulkier particles move more sluggishly. If you can remember these five relationships, you can predict how diffusion will behave in any biological system. So this table is a best summary of the factors affecting diffusion rate.